The afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across Riverside Elementary's playground. Parents chatted near their cars. Teachers locked classroom doors. Everything looked ordinary, until someone noticed the circle of laughter near the dumpsters. 8-year-old Mason Carter sat on the curb, arms wrapped around his knees, rocking gently while children threw empty juice boxes and crumpled papers at his head. His dinosaur backpack lay open in the dirt, notebooks scattered like fallen leaves. Nobody intervened, nobody called out. They simply watched, or looked away. If you're watching, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what happens next will restore your faith in humanity. But across the street, a woman named Claire Mitchell wasn't looking away. She pulled out her phone, hands shaking with anger, and recorded every second. Within an hour, that 37-second video had traveled through a dozen hands before landing in the inbox of Marcus "Tank" Holloway, president of the Iron Vow Motorcycle Club. Tank watched it 3 times. His jaw tightened. His calloused fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then he made one phone call. By sunrise, 25 engines would rumble to life. By noon, Riverside would learn what it meant when bikers stood for something bigger than the road. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about what happens when silent witnesses are replaced by those who refuse to be silent. When leather and chrome become symbols, not of rebellion, but of protection. What those children thought was just another day of cruelty was about to become a lesson the entire town would never forget. The bell rang at 3:47 p.m., releasing a flood of children through Riverside Elementary's double doors. Backpacks bounced. Voices rose in that particular pitch of freedom that only exists at the end of a school day. Teachers waved from doorways, parents leaned against minivans, and somewhere in the distance a lawnmower hummed its late September song. Mason Carter emerged last, as he always did. His steps were careful, measured, each one requiring a moment of internal negotiation. His fingers traced the strap of his dinosaur backpack in a rhythm only he understood. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause. The fabric was worn smooth from years of this same motion, a private language between boy and belonging. He was 8 years old, with dark curly hair that never quite stayed combed and glasses that constantly slipped down his nose. His t-shirt featured a faded Tyrannosaurus Rex, his favorite, though he'd never told anyone that. Mason didn't tell people much. Words felt like stones in his mouth sometimes, heavy and impossible to arrange correctly. The playground stretched before him like a minefield. Other children ran and shouted, their movements chaotic and overwhelming. Mason preferred the far corner, near the fence, where he could watch ants build their civilizations in the cracks of the sidewalk. That's where he headed now, keeping his gaze low, counting his steps. "Hey, look! It's the weirdo!" The voice came from behind him. Mason's shoulders tensed. He knew that voice. Tyler Jenkins, 5th grade, always wore basketball jerseys and had a laugh like breaking glass. Mason kept walking, 3 taps on his backpack strap. Pause, 3 taps. "I'm talking to you, freak." Footsteps quickened behind him, then hands shoved against his back, hard enough to send him stumbling forward. His backpack slipped from his shoulders, hitting the concrete with a thud that sounded too loud in Mason's ears. His notebook spilled out, pages fluttering like wounded birds. Laughter erupted. Not just Tyler. There were others now. Mason could hear them circling, could feel the weight of their attention like heat on his skin. He dropped to his knees, reaching for his notebooks, but someone kicked them further away. "What's wrong? Can't even talk?" Another voice, female this time. Sarah, who sat 3 rows ahead in class and always smelled like strawberry lip gloss. Mason's hands fluttered near his ears. The noise was too much. Too many voices, too sharp, too close. His chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped rubber bands around his ribs. "Look, he's doing that weird thing again." Tyler's shadow fell across Mason's vision. Something wet hit Mason's shoulder, a juice box, still half full, dripping sticky orange liquid down his T-Rex shirt. More laughter, more objects flying, a banana peel, crumpled paper, an empty chip bag that crinkled as it bounced off his head. Mason curled into himself, rocking slightly, trying to find that quiet place in his mind where numbers lived. Prime numbers. They were predictable, honest. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17. Are you guys seriously just watching this? A woman's voice, sharp with anger. The throwing stopped. Mason lifted his head slightly and saw a figure standing on the sidewalk across the street. A woman with short grey hair and a phone raised, pointed directly at them. "I'm recording all of you," she called out, "every single face." The children scattered like startled crows. Tyler muttered something under his breath and jogged toward the parking lot. Sarah grabbed her backpack and disappeared behind a car. Within 30 seconds, the circle had dissolved, leaving only Mason sitting alone near the dumpsters, surrounded by trash that wasn't his. Claire Mitchell crossed the street, her heart hammering. She'd lived in Riverside for 43 years, taught 3rd grade for 22 of them, and in all that time, she'd never felt quite this angry. She'd watched from her porch as the scene unfolded, paralyzed at first by disbelief, then galvanized by fury. She knelt beside Mason, who was still rocking, still counting under his breath. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly. "Are you okay? Can I help you pick up your things?" Mason didn't respond, but his rocking slowed. Claire gathered his notebooks carefully, checking each one for damage. A math workbook, a journal with dinosaur stickers on the cover, a folder labeled Mason Carter, Mrs. Richardson's class, room 14. "Where are your parents?" Claire asked gently. Mason's fingers tapped his leg. 3 times. Pause. 3 times. "It's okay. You don't have to talk. Let's just get your stuff together." Claire helped him stand, handed him his backpack, made sure his glasses were straight. She looked around the playground. Teachers were still visible in doorways, parents still clustered by their vehicles. How many had seen? How many had simply looked away? Claire pulled out her phone and opened the video she'd just recorded. 37 seconds. It felt longer, it felt like hours. She watched Tyler's face as he threw the juice box, Sarah's smirk as she kicked the notebooks. Then she opened her contacts and scrolled until she found a name she hadn't called in months, Marcus Holloway. Her nephew, a man who wore leather and rode chrome and lived by a code that most people didn't understand. But Claire understood. She understood perfectly. She pressed dial. Drop a comment below if you've ever witnessed bullying, or if someone stood up for you when you needed it most. Marcus "Tank" Holloway was under his Harley-Davidson when his phone buzzed. Oil stained his hands, and the concrete floor of his garage was cold against his back. He ignored the first buzz, the second. But on the third, he rolled out from under the bike, wiped his hands on a rag that had seen cleaner days, and checked the screen. "Aunt Claire." He frowned. Claire Mitchell didn't call unless it mattered. She wasn't the type to check in just to chat. When Claire called, something was wrong, or something needed to be made right. "Aunt Claire," he answered, wedging the phone between his shoulder and ear as he stood. "Marcus, I need you to watch something." Her voice was tight, controlled in that way that meant she was holding back anger. "I'm sending it now. Call me back after you see it." The line went dead before he could respond. A moment later, his phone chimed with an incoming message. He tapped it, and a video began to play. 37 seconds. Tank watched in silence. His jaw tightened as a juice box hit the boy's shoulder. His eyes narrowed as laughter echoed from the phone's tiny speaker. When the video ended, he didn't move for a long moment. Then he replayed it, and again. On the third viewing, he paused it on the boy's face. The kid was maybe 8, maybe 9. Dark curly hair, glasses, a T-shirt with a dinosaur on it, and an expression Tank recognized, not from his own childhood, but from his younger brother's. That particular kind of overwhelm, that retreat inward when the world became too much. His brother had been autistic. Had been. Past tense. Because Jamie Holloway died at 16 in a car accident that had nothing to do with his challenges and everything to do with a drunk driver who ran a red light. Tank was 19 when it happened. He'd been teaching Jamie how to work on motorcycles, how to find peace in the rhythm of engines and the logic of mechanics. Tank called Claire back. "Who's the kid?" "Mason Carter, lives on Maple, 2 streets over from the school. His mother's a nurse at County General, single mom, works doubles most weeks." Claire's voice was steadier now, but the anger underneath hadn't faded. "I've seen him around the neighborhood. He's always alone, Marcus, always." "And the school did what, exactly?" "I haven't called them yet. I wanted to talk to you first." Claire paused. "I know what you're going to say, that this isn't your business, that I should go through official channels, but I've been teaching for over 20 years, Marcus, and I know how those channels work. Meetings, paperwork, maybe a stern talk. Meanwhile, that boy goes back to school tomorrow and faces the same kids who did this today." Tank walked to the doorway of his garage and looked out at the street. His Harley gleamed in the fading sunlight. Down the block he could see other bikes parked in driveways. His neighbors, his brothers, men and women who wore the Iron Vow patch and understood what it meant. "You're right," he said quietly. "Channels don't fix this, but showing up does." "What are you thinking?" Tank's mind was already working through logistics, numbers, timing, impact. "I'm thinking that boy needs to know someone's got his back, and those kids need to understand that actions have consequences." "Marcus, not violence, Aunt Claire. I'm not talking about scaring children. I'm talking about respect, about showing Mason that he's not alone, and showing everyone else that bullying doesn't get ignored." Tank pulled out his phone again, scrolling through his contacts, a list of names, each one representing a rider, a brother, a sister, someone who'd sworn the same oath he had. "How many can you get?" Claire asked. "By tomorrow morning," Tank calculated. 25, maybe 30. Enough to make a point. And what point is that? Tank looked back at the paused video on his phone, the boy's face frozen in that moment of overwhelm. That nobody should feel invisible, that kindness matters, and that if the world won't stand up, we will. Claire was quiet for a moment. Then, "His mother gets home around 6. I have her number. I think you should call her. Send it over. Marcus, thank you. Don't thank me yet. We haven't done anything but talk." But even as he said it, Tank was already moving. He opened his group chat, Iron Vow brothers and sisters, and typed a message that was short and direct. "Emergency meet tonight. 8 p.m. my garage. Bring your conscience." Responses came within seconds. Thumbs up. "On my way." "What's happening?" "Be there." Tank set his phone down and returned to his Harley. The oil change could wait. He had calls to make, a plan to build and a promise to keep, even if it was to a kid he'd never met. Because that's what the oath meant. Not the leather, not the bikes, not the rumble of engines on open highways. It meant standing for those who couldn't stand alone. It meant being the voice when silence felt safer. It meant remembering what it felt like to be small and scared and surrounded. Jamie would have wanted this. Jamie would have understood. Tank reached for his phone again and dialed the number Claire had sent. A woman answered on the 3rd ring, her voice tired and wary. "Ms. Carter, my name is Marcus Holloway. You don't know me, but I just saw something happen to your son today, and I think we need to talk." Amanda Carter was folding laundry when her phone rang. The apartment was small, a 2-bedroom on the 2nd floor of a building that had seen better decades. The washer made a grinding noise, the fridge hummed too loudly, and the carpet near the door was worn thin from years of feet that weren't hers. But it was clean, it was safe, and it was theirs. She glanced at the caller ID, unknown number. Her first instinct was to ignore it. Unknown numbers meant telemarketers or debt collectors or someone trying to sell her something she couldn't afford. But something made her answer anyway. "Hello? Ms. Carter, my name is Marcus Holloway. You don't know me, but I just saw something happen to your son today, and I think we need to talk." Amanda's stomach dropped. "What happened? Is Mason okay? Where is he?" "He's fine. Physically, at least. But there was an incident at school this afternoon. Kids were throwing trash at him, bullying him. My aunt witnessed it and recorded it. I'm calling because I want to help." Amanda's legs felt suddenly weak. She sank onto the couch, the phone pressed hard against her ear. "Throwing trash? What do you mean? Where were the teachers?" "That's a good question," Marcus said, his voice low and steady. "My aunt was across the street and saw the whole thing. Nobody else stepped in. I can send you the video if you want to see it, but I'll warn you, it's not easy to watch." "Send it." The video arrived 30 seconds later. Amanda played it with shaking hands. She watched her son, her beautiful, gentle boy, curled on the ground while children laughed and threw garbage at him. She watched him rock, watched his hands flutter, watched him retreat into that place where he went when the world became too much. By the time the video ended, tears were streaming down her face. She replayed it, watched it again, saw the faces of the children who did this, saw the adults in the background who did nothing. "Ms. Carter, you still there?" "I'm here." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I know this is hard, but I'm calling because I want to do something about it. Not through lawyers or school boards, not yet anyway. I want to show your son that people care. I ride with a motorcycle club, and we've helped kids in situations like this before. With your permission, we'd like to do something for Mason." Amanda wiped her eyes. "What kind of something?" "We'd like to escort him to school tomorrow. 25, maybe 30 riders. We'll meet him at your apartment, ride with him to Riverside Elementary, and walk him inside. We won't touch the other kids. We won't threaten anyone. We're just going to show him, and everyone else, that he's not alone." "You're serious?" "Completely." Amanda looked across the room to where Mason sat at the kitchen table, coloring in a dinosaur book. He'd been quiet since coming home, quieter than usual. She'd asked him about his day, and he'd just shrugged and returned to his crayons. She should have known. She should have seen it. "I don't know you," Amanda said carefully. "You could be anyone." "Fair. My aunt's name is Claire Mitchell. She lives on Oakwood, taught at Riverside for over 20 years. You can look her up. I can give you references, people who've worked with us before, or I can just step back and let you handle this your way. But Miss Carter," Marcus paused, "your son deserves to feel safe, and tomorrow we can help make that happen." Amanda closed her eyes. She thought about Mason's face in that video. She thought about how many times he'd come home with dirt on his clothes, or torn papers in his backpack, or that distant look in his eyes that meant something had hurt him. How many times had she missed the signs? How many days had he suffered in silence because he didn't have the words, or because he'd learned that telling didn't change anything? "Okay," she said finally. "What do you need from me?" "Just your address and a time. We'll handle the rest." Amanda gave him the information, her voice steadier now. They talked for another 10 minutes. Logistics, expectations, reassurances. Marcus explained that the riders included teachers, nurses, veterans, parents, people with families and jobs and lives outside the leather, people who believed in standing up. When the call ended, Amanda sat for a long moment staring at her phone. Then she walked to the kitchen table and sat beside Mason. He didn't look up from his coloring, but his hand slowed slightly. "Mason, honey?" 3 taps on the crayon. Pause. 3 taps. "Something's going to happen tomorrow morning. Some people are going to come here. People on motorcycles. They want to take you to school. Is that okay?" Mason's hand stopped completely. He looked up at her, his dark eyes wide behind his glasses. "Why?" It was the first word he'd spoken since coming home. Amanda's throat tightened. "Because they want to show you that you're important, that you're not alone." "Will they be loud?" "Probably. Motorcycles are loud." Amanda reached out and gently touched his hand. "But they'll be kind. And they'll be with you." Mason considered this. His fingers tapped the table. 3 times, pause. 3 times. Then he nodded just once and returned to his coloring. Amanda went to her bedroom and closed the door. Then she sat on the edge of her bed and cried, for her son, for herself, for every moment she hadn't been there to shield him from a world that didn't understand. But tomorrow, she thought, tomorrow someone would stand with him. "If you're from Riverside, or know someone who's been bullied, drop your city and state in the comments. Let's see how far this message of respect travels. By 8:15 p.m., Marcus Tank Holloway's garage was packed. Motorcycles lined the driveway and spilled onto the street. The air smelled of leather, engine oil, and the faint sweetness of autumn leaves. Voices mixed in low conversation as riders filed in, each one nodding to Tank as they entered. The Iron Vow Motorcycle Club wasn't the largest in the state, but it was one of the most respected. Its members ranged from factory workers to teachers, from veterans to nurses. What united them wasn't a love of rebellion or a thirst for the open road, though both were present, but a code, a set of principles that mattered more than any patch or banner. Tank stood near the workbench, arms crossed, waiting until the noise settled. Beside him stood his second-in-command, a woman named Rachel Rev Carson. She was 52, had silver hair cut short, and worked as a trauma nurse at County General. She'd also been riding since she was 16 and could strip down an engine faster than most men half her age. "All right, everyone here?" Tank's voice cut through the murmur. Heads turned, conversations died. 27 riders stood or leaned against walls, their attention fixed on him. "Most of you got my message. Emergency meet, I'm going to show you why." Tank pulled out his phone, connected it to a speaker, and played the video Claire had sent. 37 seconds of silence. Then curses, muttered anger. A woman near the back, Jess, a kindergarten teacher, had to turn away, her hand over her mouth. "That's Mason Carter," Tank said when the video ended. 8 years old, autistic, lives 2 streets over from Riverside Elementary. His mother's a single parent, works double shifts as a nurse. He paused, letting the information settle. "Tomorrow morning we're going to escort him to school." "What's the plan?" asked Danny, a wiry man with graying stubble and a patch that read Road Captain. He was a veteran, had served 2 tours overseas, and carried himself with the quiet intensity of someone who'd seen too much and decided to do better anyway. Simple. We meet at his apartment at 7:30 a.m. We ride with him to the school. We walk him to the front door. We don't engage with the kids who did this. We don't threaten anyone. We just show up and let our presence speak. Tank looked around the room. This isn't about revenge. It's about respect. It's about showing one kid that he matters. "And the school's okay with this?" asked Rev, her arms crossed. "They don't get a say," Tank replied. "We're not stepping on campus property. We're escorting a student to a public institution. No laws broken, no rules violated. Just a group of citizens exercising their right to stand with someone who needs it. What if the parents of those other kids show up? What if they get defensive?" This from a younger rider named Corey, who worked at a local auto shop and had joined the club only 6 months prior. Tank met his eyes. "Then we stay calm. We don't escalate. We're not here to fight parents or kids. We're here to support Mason. Period." Rev spoke up. "I work with his mom, Amanda Carter. Good woman. Works herself to the bone to keep that kid fed and safe. She doesn't deserve this." "Nobody does," Tank said quietly. "But especially not a kid who can't defend himself." The room was silent for a moment. Then Jess, the kindergarten teacher, stepped forward. "I'm in. What do you need from us?" "Show up. Dress clean. No offensive patches, no aggressive language. We're representing something bigger than ourselves tomorrow." Tank's gaze swept the room. "We're representing the idea that bullying doesn't get a free pass, that cruelty has consequences, and that sometimes the world needs people who are willing to stand when it's easier to look away." One by one, hands went up, nods of agreement. Voices affirming commitment. By the time Tank finished explaining logistics, route, formation, timing, he had 28 confirmed riders. More than he'd expected, more than he'd hoped for. "One more thing," Tank added. "We're not doing this for publicity. No social media posts until after it's done. No cameras unless Amanda gives permission. This is about Mason, not us." "Understood," Rev said, and the room echoed the sentiment. As the meeting broke up, Riders lingered to talk in small groups. Stories emerged, memories of being bullied, of watching someone else suffer, of wishing they'd done something differently. Danny shared a story about his son, who'd struggled with ADHD and faced relentless teasing until Danny had shown up at school one day and simply sat with him at lunch. The teasing had stopped, not because of threats, because of presence. Tank stepped outside, needing air. The night was cool, the stars bright above the suburban sprawl. He thought about Jamie, his younger brother, gone now for over a decade. Jamie had loved motorcycles, had loved the way the engine's rhythm drowned out the noise of the world. He'd been learning to rebuild a carburetor the week before he died. "You thinking about him?" Rev's voice came from beside him. She leaned against the garage wall, a cigarette in her hand, unlit. "Always," Tank admitted. "He'd be proud of this. Maybe. Or he'd tell me I'm being dramatic." Tank smiled faintly. Jamie had a way of keeping things simple. He'd probably just say, "Help the kid. Don't overthink it." Rev nodded. Smart kid. He was. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Rev pushed off the wall. "I'm going to call Amanda. Let her know we're all set. She's probably nervous. Tell her we'll take care of him." "I will." Tank watched her walk back inside, then turned his gaze to the street. 28 motorcycles, 28 people willing to wake up early, disrupt their mornings, and stand for a kid they'd never met. It wasn't much, maybe, but it was something, and sometimes something was enough. He thought about Mason, imagined him sitting at a kitchen table somewhere, coloring dinosaurs and counting in rhythms only he understood. Tomorrow, that boy would see 24 motorcycles pull up outside his home. He'd hear engines roar, he'd feel the vibration in his chest, and maybe, just maybe, he'd understand that he wasn't alone. Amanda Carter woke at 5:30 a.m., an hour before her alarm. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through everything that could go wrong. What if the bikers didn't show? What if they did, and it made things worse? What if Mason got overwhelmed by the noise and couldn't handle it? But then she remembered the video, the trash, the laughter, the way her son had curled into himself while the world watched and did nothing. She got up. By 6:45 a.m., she'd showered, dressed, and made breakfast. Scrambled eggs and toast, Mason's favorite. He emerged from his room at exactly 7 a.m., as he did every morning. Routine was important. Predictability was safety. "Morning, honey," Amanda said, trying to keep her voice light. "Ready for a big day?" Mason nodded. He ate slowly, methodically, cutting his toast into perfect squares. Amanda watched him, her heart aching with a love so fierce it felt like drowning. At 7:20 a.m., Amanda's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We're 5 minutes out." "You ready?" Amanda typed back. "Ready." She knelt beside Mason, who was putting on his dinosaur backpack. "Remember what I told you? The motorcycles are coming. They're going to be loud, but they're here to help you. Okay?" Mason's fingers tapped his leg. 3 times. Pause. 3 times. Okay. At exactly 7:28 a.m., the first rumble reached them. Low at first, like distant thunder, then closer, louder. The windows rattled, car alarms chirped in protest. Amanda opened the apartment door and stepped onto the second-floor walkway. Mason followed, his hand gripping hers tightly. Below, in the parking lot and along the street, motorcycles were arriving. Not 2 or 3, not a handful, but a formation. A procession of chrome and leather that stretched down the block. 28 bikes, 28 riders. They parked in perfect alignment, engines idling, the sound a collective heartbeat. Then, one by one, the engines cut. Silence rushed back in, sudden and profound. A man dismounted from the lead bike. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a greying beard and a patch on his jacket that read, "Iron Vow MC, President." He looked up at Amanda and Mason, then raised a hand in greeting. "Amanda Carter." "That's me." "Marcus Holloway. We spoke on the phone. This is my crew." He gestured to the riders behind him, who were now dismounting, removing helmets, and standing at ease. We're here for Mason. Amanda felt tears prick her eyes. She squeezed Mason's hand. Thank you. Thank us later. Let's get your boy to school. Marcus walked to the base of the stairs and looked up at Mason. Hey, buddy, you like dinosaurs? Mason nodded, his eyes wide behind his glasses. Me too. T-Rex is my favorite. What's yours? Velociraptor, Mason whispered. Smart choice. Fast and clever. Marcus smiled. You ready to ride with us? Mason looked at his mother. Amanda nodded. It's okay, honey. They're going to keep you safe. One by one, the riders approached. They introduced themselves quietly, respectfully. Rev, the nurse, Danny, the veteran, Jess, the teacher, Corey, the mechanic, each one shaking Mason's hand gently, speaking in calm tones. Then Rev knelt beside Mason and pulled something from her jacket pocket, a small velociraptor figurine, painted in bright greens and blues. For you, she said, to remind you that you're fierce. Mason took it carefully, his fingers tracing the contours. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. Then he looked up at Rev and smiled, a small, shy smile that broke Amanda's heart and mended it at the same time. All right, Marcus said, his voice carrying over the group. Formation, slow and steady. No showing off. We're here to escort, not intimidate. Everyone clear? Clear? The riders responded in unison. Amanda and Mason climbed into Amanda's car, and the motorcycles formed around them, a protective convoy, with Marcus leading and Danny bringing up the rear. The engines roared back to life, a sound that made Mason cover his ears at first, but then his expression shifted. Curiosity replaced fear. He lowered his hands and watched through the window as the bikes began to move. The ride to Riverside Elementary took 6 minutes. The convoy moved at exactly 20 miles per hour, obeying every traffic law, signaling every turn. But the sound, the collective rumble of 28 motorcycles, echoed through the streets like rolling thunder. People stopped to watch. Curtains parted, doors opened. Parents walking their children to school paused on sidewalks, phones raised, recording the procession. Some smiled, some frowned. All of them noticed. When they arrived at Riverside Elementary, the parking lot was already filling with cars, parents dropping off children, teachers arriving for the day. But as the motorcycles pulled in, a disciplined, deliberate line, everything stopped. Marcus parked his bike and dismounted. The rest followed suit. They formed 2 lines, creating a path from Amanda's car to the school's front entrance. Silent, steady, present. Amanda opened her door, then Mason's. He stepped out slowly, clutching his velociraptor figurine in one hand and his backpack strap in the other. His gaze swept the scene, the bikes, the riders, the watching faces of students and parents and teachers. Marcus stepped forward. Ready, Mason? Mason nodded. Then let's walk. And they did. Mason walked between Amanda and Marcus, with Rev on one side and Danny on the other. Behind them, 24 more riders followed in formation, not aggressive, not threatening, just there. Undeniably powerfully there. Students stared, parents whispered, teachers emerged from doorways, confusion and curiosity written across their faces. And then, near the entrance, Mason saw them. Tyler, Sarah, the others from yesterday. They stood frozen, their eyes wide, their mouths open. Marcus stopped a few feet from the door. He looked down at Mason. You're going to be okay. You know why? Mason shook his head. Because you're not alone. Not anymore. You've got us. And more importantly, you've got yourself. You're stronger than you think. Mason's fingers tapped his leg 3 times. Pause. 3 times. Then he looked up at Marcus and said very quietly, Thank you. Marcus smiled. Any time, buddy. Any time. Amanda walked Mason to the door, hugged him tight, and watched as he disappeared inside. Then she turned back to the riders, tears streaming freely now. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. Rev stepped forward and pulled her into a hug. He's going to be all right. I know, Amanda said, I know. If this story is hitting home, hit that like button. And let's make sure every kid like Mason knows they're not alone. The motorcycles didn't leave immediately. Marcus had planned it that way. After Amanda hugged Mason and watched him disappear through the school's double doors, the riders remained in formation, a silent, imposing presence in the parking lot of Riverside Elementary. Parents lingered near their cars, uncertain. Some pulled out phones, recording the scene. Others herded their children toward the entrance, casting wary glances over their shoulders. Teachers stood in doorways, whispering to one another, unsure whether to intervene or simply observe. Marcus stood at the head of the formation, arms crossed, his expression calm but unyielding. He wasn't here to start a fight. He wasn't here to threaten anyone. He was here to make a point, and that point required presence, not words. Rev leaned close to him. "Principal's coming out." Marcus followed her gaze. A woman in her 50s, wearing a grey blazer and an expression of barely concealed irritation, was making her way across the parking lot. Her heels clicked sharply against the pavement. Behind her trailed a younger man, probably a vice principal or security coordinator. "Can I help you?" the principal asked, her tone clipped. "No, ma'am," Marcus replied evenly. "We're just seeing a student safely to school." "With 28 motorcycles?" She gestured broadly at the formation. "This is disruptive. You're making parents uncomfortable. Are we breaking any laws?" The principal hesitated. "No, but are we on school property?" "The parking lot is technically public access," Marcus interrupted gently. "We're not trespassing. We're not threatening anyone. We're just standing here." The principal's jaw tightened. "What is this about?" "It's about a boy named Mason Carter," Rev said, stepping forward. She was still in her nurse's scrubs under her riding jacket, having come straight from a night shift. "It's about the fact that yesterday kids threw trash at him while he sat on the ground. It's about the fact that nobody stopped them." The principal blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" Marcus pulled out his phone and played the video. 37 seconds. The principal watched, her expression shifting from irritation to shock to something that looked like shame. "I wasn't aware," she began. "That's the problem," Marcus said quietly. "Nobody was aware. Or if they were, nobody did anything. So we did." The principal's shoulders sagged slightly. She looked back at the school, then at the motorcycles, then at Marcus. "What do you want from us?" "We want you to do your job," Rev said. "We want you to make sure Mason Carter feels safe here. We want those kids who bullied him to understand that their actions matter. And we want every other kid in that school to know that cruelty isn't acceptable. And if we don't," Marcus met her gaze, "then we'll be back, every day, until things change." The principal stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "I'll speak with the students involved. And I'll meet with Miss Carter to discuss what happened and how we can prevent it in the future." "Good," Marcus said. "That's all we're asking." The principal turned and walked back toward the school, the vice principal following. As they disappeared inside, the tension in the parking lot eased slightly. Parents began moving again, children filing toward the entrance. But the riders didn't move. Not yet. "How long do we stay?" Corey asked, his voice low. "Until the bell rings," Marcus replied. "We stay until every kid is inside. We stay until they understand that we're serious." So they stood. 28 riders, silent and still, their motorcycles parked in perfect alignment behind them. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the pavement. The sound of children's voices filled the air, laughter, shouts, the everyday chaos of an elementary school morning. And then, just before the bell rang, something unexpected happened. A boy, maybe 10 years old, small for his age, with thick glasses and a limp, approached the line of riders. He stopped a few feet away, clutching his backpack straps, his eyes wide. "Are you here for Mason?" he asked quietly. Marcus nodded. "We are." "Good." The boy's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm glad someone is." Then he turned and walked toward the school, his limp more pronounced now that Marcus was watching. Rev glanced at Marcus, and he saw his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. How many more kids like Mason are there? How many others suffer in silence? The bell rang. The last of the students disappeared inside. Marcus raised a hand, signaling to the riders, "Mount up, we're done here." Engines roared to life, one by one, the sound cascading through the parking lot like a wave. Marcus took one last look at the school, at the building where Mason would spend the rest of his day, hopefully safer than yesterday, hopefully knowing he wasn't alone. Then he climbed onto his Harley, kicked it into gear, and led the convoy out of the parking lot. They rode in silence, each rider lost in their own thoughts. Some were thinking about their own children, some were remembering their own childhoods. All of them were thinking about Mason, and about the boy with the limp, and about every other kid who needed someone to stand with them. Back at Marcus's garage, the riders dismounted and gathered one last time. Coffee appeared from someone's thermos. Cigarettes were lit. Quiet conversations began. "Think it'll make a difference?" Corey asked. "It already has," Rev said, nodding toward her phone. "Amanda just texted me. Mason's teacher pulled him aside before class and told him she was glad he was there. Said she saw the motorcycles and wanted him to know he was brave." "That's something," Danny said quietly. "It's everything," Marcus corrected. "For Mason, right now, that's everything." The group lingered for another hour, sharing stories, making plans for future rides, discussing other kids they knew who might need help. By the time they dispersed, the sun was high and the day had fully begun. Marcus stayed behind, cleaning his garage, putting tools back in their places. His hands moved automatically, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about Jamie, about the promise he'd made at his brother's funeral, to live in a way that honored who Jamie had been, to stand for those who couldn't stand alone. Today, he'd kept that promise. Tomorrow, he'd keep it again. By lunchtime, the video had gone viral. Not the original video of Mason being bullied, though that was circulating too, but a new one. A parent had recorded the motorcycles arriving at Riverside Elementary, had captured the moment when Mason walked between the riders, had filmed the silent formation that stood watch until every child was safe inside. Someone had posted it with the caption, "When a town fails a child, strangers become family. This is what respect looks like." Within 6 hours, it had 400,000 views. By evening, it had been shared across 14 states. Amanda Carter saw it first on her lunch break at County General. She was sitting in the staff room, eating a sandwich she'd made that morning, when her phone exploded with notifications. Messages from friends, tags from acquaintances, strangers sending her heart emojis and prayers. She clicked the video and watched, tears streaming down her face as her son walked through a corridor of motorcycles and into a school that had failed him just one day before. Rev found her there, still crying, the sandwich forgotten. "You okay?" "I don't know," Amanda admitted. "I'm grateful. I'm overwhelmed. I'm angry that it took this to make people pay attention." Rev sat beside her. "Anger's fair. Hold on to it. Use it. Make sure the school follows through." "I will." "And Amanda?" Rev squeezed her hand. "Mason's not alone anymore. None of us are." At Riverside Elementary, the day had been tense. Tyler, Sarah, and the others involved in the bullying had been pulled into the principal's office one by one. Their parents had been called. Suspensions were discussed. Apologies were demanded. But more significantly, the other students had noticed. In classrooms, in hallways, during recess, the whispers spread. "Did you see the motorcycles? Did you see what they did for Mason?" Mason himself spent the day in a quiet daze. His teacher, Mrs. Richardson, had made a point of sitting with him during reading time, of praising his work, of making sure he felt seen. Other kids approached him cautiously at recess, not to mock, but to ask questions. "Do you know them? The bikers? Are they coming back?" Mason didn't have answers. But he had the Velociraptor figurine in his pocket, and he had the memory of Marcus's voice. "You're stronger than you think." At home that evening, Marcus's phone wouldn't stop ringing. News stations wanted interviews. Bloggers wanted quotes. Other motorcycle clubs wanted to coordinate similar efforts. He ignored most of it. This wasn't about publicity. This wasn't about credit. This was about Mason. But one call he did answer. It came from a woman in Ohio, her voice shaking. "My son is autistic. He's been bullied for 2 years. I saw what you did. Can you help us?" Marcus listened. He took notes. He promised to connect her with a local club in her area. When the call ended, he sat for a long moment, staring at his phone. Rev called him an hour later. "You see the news?" "I'm trying not to." "Well, you should. They're calling us heroes." "We're not heroes," Marcus said firmly. "We're just people who showed up. Sometimes that's the same thing." That night, Marcus returned to his garage. He pulled out a photo he kept tucked in his toolbox. Jamie, age 14, standing beside the Harley they'd been rebuilding together. Jamie's smile was wide, his hands covered in grease, his eyes bright with the kind of joy that only comes from doing something you love with someone you trust. "We did good today, little brother," Marcus whispered to the photo. "We did good." At the Carter apartment, Mason was drawing. He sat at the kitchen table, crayons scattered around him, working on a picture with fierce concentration. Amanda watched from the doorway, unwilling to interrupt. When he finished, he held it up. It was a drawing of motorcycles, dozens of them, rendered in bright colors with careful detail. In the center, a small figure with glasses and a dinosaur backpack. Around him, larger figures with helmets and jackets. At the bottom, in shaky letters, Mason had written, "My friends." Amanda crossed the room, knelt beside him and pulled him into a hug. Mason didn't pull away. He leaned into her, his small body warm and solid and safe. "You have good friends, honey," Amanda whispered. "I know," Mason said. And for the first time in a long time, he smiled without hesitation. 3 days later, Amanda Carter received a call from Riverside Elementary. The principal requested a meeting. Not disciplinary, the secretary assured her, but collaborative. Amanda agreed, though skepticism sat heavy in her chest. She arrived at 4:00 p.m. after her shift ended at County General. The principal's office was small, cluttered with plaques and framed certificates that spoke of achievement, but not necessarily of compassion. Principal Lawson sat behind her desk, her expression carefully neutral. "Ms. Carter, thank you for coming." She gestured to a chair. "I wanted to follow up on what happened last week and discuss steps we're taking to ensure Mason feels safe here." Amanda sat, her hands folded in her lap. "I'm listening." "First, the students involved have been disciplined. Tyler Jenkins received a 3-day suspension. Sarah Mitchell and the others received in-school suspension and mandatory counseling sessions." Principal Lawson consulted a paper on her desk. "Second, we're implementing a buddy system for recess, pairing students who might be vulnerable with older peer mentors." "And what happens when the suspensions end, when the counseling sessions are over?" Amanda's voice was calm but edged with steel. "What happens when the cameras aren't watching anymore?" Principal Lawson hesitated. "We're committed to monitoring the situation closely." "That's not enough." Amanda leaned forward. "My son was bullied for months, and nobody noticed. Or if they did, nobody cared enough to stop it. A suspension doesn't fix that. A buddy system doesn't fix that. What would you like us to do?" "I want training. For teachers, for staff, for students. I want people to understand what autism looks like, how to support kids like Mason, how to recognize when something's wrong." Amanda's voice rose slightly. "I want this school to care before something goes viral, before strangers on motorcycles have to show up to make you pay attention." Principal Lawson was quiet for a moment, then she nodded. "You're right. We failed Mason, and we failed you. I can't undo that, but I can commit to doing better." She pulled out a folder. "I've been in contact with the district's special education coordinator. We're scheduling sensitivity training for all staff within the next month. And I'd like to invite you to speak at our next parent-teacher meeting, if you're willing." Amanda blinked, surprised. "You want me to speak?" "I think parents need to hear from you. They need to understand what their children's cruelty looks like from the other side." Principal Lawson met her gaze. "And I think the staff needs to hear it too." Amanda considered this. Part of her wanted to refuse, to protect herself and Mason from further exposure. But another part, the part that had watched her son curl into himself while the world watched, knew that silence had never protected anyone. "Okay," she said finally, "I'll speak." That evening, Amanda told Mason about the meeting. He listened quietly, his fingers tapping his leg in that familiar rhythm. When she finished, he asked, "Will the bikers come back?" "I don't know, honey. Do you want them to?" Mason thought about this. "No, I think I'm okay now." Amanda's heart swelled. "You are, aren't you?" "Yeah." Mason returned to his homework, his pencil moving across the page with careful precision. But before Amanda could leave the room, he added, "But if I need them, they'd come, right?" "Right," Amanda said. They'd come. At Marcus's garage, life had returned to a semblance of normalcy. The media attention had faded. The viral video had been replaced by newer stories, shinier spectacles. But the calls continued, parents from other towns, other states asking for help, asking for advice, asking if the Iron Vow could do for their children what they'd done for Mason. Marcus and Rev sat in the garage, going through requests, trying to figure out how to scale something that had never been meant to scale. "We can't be everywhere," Rev said, frustration creeping into her voice. "We're not a national organization, we're just a club." "Then maybe we help other clubs start doing this," Marcus suggested. "We share what we did, we create a template, we make it so any group of riders can step up when they need to." Rev looked at him. "You're serious?" "No, why not? It's not about us. It's about kids like Mason, and if we can help more of them, why wouldn't we?" Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus and Rev drafted a guide, a simple document outlining how to organize an escort ride, how to approach schools and parents, how to stay within legal boundaries while making maximum impact. They shared it with allied clubs, posted it in forums, sent it to anyone who asked. The response was overwhelming. Clubs across the country began organizing their own rides. A boy in Texas with Down syndrome got a 40-bike escort. A girl in Oregon who'd been cyberbullied found herself surrounded by 50 riders who stood with her at a school board meeting. The movement grew, not because of media coverage, but because of need, because there were too many kids like Mason and not enough people willing to stand for them. One evening, as Marcus was closing up the garage, his phone rang. The caller ID said Amanda Carter. "Marcus, it's Amanda. I just wanted to tell you something." "What's that?" "Mason made a friend today, at school. A boy named Eric, who likes dinosaurs too. They sat together at lunch." Her voice wavered. "It's the first time he's had a friend in 2 years." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "That's good. That's really good. It wouldn't have happened without you. Without all of you. It would have," Marcus said quietly. "Mason did that. He showed up. He kept being himself. We just made sure people noticed." "Well, thank you for noticing." After they hung up, Marcus sat in the garage for a long time, the phone still in his hand. He thought about Jamie, about the promise he'd made, about the weight of witness, the responsibility of seeing suffering and choosing not to look away. Outside, the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere, children were safe. Somewhere, they were loved. Somewhere, they knew they mattered, and that, Marcus thought, was worth every mile. 6 months passed. Winter came to Riverside, blanketing the town in quiet snow and shorter days. Life moved forward, as it always does, carrying people along in its current, some willingly, some reluctantly. All of them changed in ways they might not fully understand. Mason Carter turned 9 in January. His birthday party was small, just his mother, his new friend Eric, and Eric's parents. But Amanda made dinosaur-shaped cookies, and Mason smiled the entire afternoon, a real smile that reached his eyes. At school, things had improved. Not perfectly. Perfection was never the goal, but tangibly. The sensitivity training Principal Lawson had promised actually happened. Teachers learned to recognize signs of distress in neurodivergent students. A zero-tolerance bullying policy was implemented, with real consequences and consistent enforcement. Tyler Jenkins, the boy who'd thrown the first juice box, returned from his suspension quieter, more subdued. His parents had enrolled him in counseling, and slowly, painfully, he began to understand what he'd done. It wasn't forgiveness. That would take time and might never come fully. But it was the beginning of accountability. Sarah Mitchell, who'd kicked Mason's notebooks across the pavement, wrote him a letter in March. It was clumsy, full of erasures and uncertain phrasing, but it was genuine. "I'm sorry," it said. "I didn't think about how it made you feel. I should have." Mason didn't respond, but he kept the letter in his desk drawer, folded carefully. Amanda Carter spoke at 3 parent-teacher meetings, her voice growing stronger each time. She talked about what it was like to watch your child suffer, to feel helpless, to wonder if anyone else saw what you saw. Parents listened. Some cried. Some approached her afterward with their own stories, their own struggles, and slowly the culture shifted, not everywhere, not completely, but in Riverside Elementary, a new awareness took root, a recognition that kindness wasn't passive, that standing by was a choice, and that every child deserved to feel safe. The Iron Vow Motorcycle Club continued their work. Marcus and Rev had organized 4 more escort rides in nearby towns, each one for a different child, each one a statement that cruelty would not go unanswered. The template they'd created had spread to 17 states, and stories filtered back of other clubs taking up the mantle. One Saturday in late March, Marcus received an email. The subject line read, "Thank you from Ohio." He opened it and found a photo. A boy, maybe 10 years old, standing between 2 rows of motorcycles, his smile bright enough to light the screen. The message below was simple. "Because of what you did, we knew what to do. Jacob hasn't been bullied in 3 months. You gave us hope." Marcus printed the photo and pinned it to the wall of his garage, next to the one of Jamie. 2 boys, 2 smiles, 2 stories connected by chrome and courage. In April, Amanda invited Marcus, Rev, and the other riders to dinner at her apartment. It was cramped. 28 people don't fit easily into a 2-bedroom space, but they made it work. They spilled onto the walkway, leaned against railings, sat on the stairs. Amanda cooked pasta, and everyone brought something. The smell of garlic bread and laughter filled the evening air. Mason sat at the kitchen table, quietly drawing, while the adults talked around him. But when Rev asked what he was working on, he held it up proudly. It was a new picture. Motorcycles, yes, but this time they were riding down a road that stretched into the distance. In the sky above, he'd drawn stars, bright and countless. "What's this one called?" Rev asked. Mason thought for a moment. "Going home." "Where's home?" Mason pointed at the people gathered in the small apartment. "Here." Later that night, after the guests had left and Mason had gone to bed, Amanda stood on the walkway outside her apartment. The night was cool, the stars visible above the glow of streetlights. She thought about the video that had started everything, about the 37 seconds that had changed her son's life. She thought about how close she'd come to doing nothing, to accepting that this was just how the world worked. And she thought about the strangers who'd refused to accept it, who'd shown up with engines and leather and a promise that resonated louder than any threat. "You are not alone." Marcus stood in his garage, the door open to the night, a wrench in his hand, though he wasn't working on anything. He was just standing, thinking about the photo on his wall, about Jamie, about Mason, about Jacob in Ohio, and all the other kids whose names he'd never know, but whose lives had been touched by the simple act of showing up. Rev had asked him once if he thought they'd made a real difference. "How do you measure that?" she'd said. "How do you know if what we did mattered?" Marcus had thought about it for a long time before answering. "You don't," he'd said finally. "You just keep showing up. and trust that it does. Now, standing alone in the quiet garage, he thought about that conversation again. He thought about Mason's smile, about Amanda's tears, about the letter from Sarah and the drawing from Mason and the photo from Ohio. Maybe Rev was right. Maybe you couldn't measure impact. Maybe you couldn't quantify the moment when a child who'd felt invisible suddenly felt seen. Maybe you couldn't chart the ripple effect of courage, the way one act of standing up could inspire 100 others. But you could feel it, in the weight of a handshake, in the sound of a mother's voice saying thank you, in the sight of a boy walking into school with his head held higher than it had been the day before. Marcus set down the wrench and pulled out his phone. He scrolled to a message thread labeled, Iron Vow, Active. He typed, anyone free Sunday morning? Got a call from a parent in Greenfield. Kid with ADHD being targeted. Could use some backup. The responses came within minutes. Count me in, I'm there. What time? Let's ride. Marcus smiled and pocketed the phone. Outside, the night stretched vast and quiet. Somewhere, engines waited to roar. Somewhere, a child needed to know they mattered. Somewhere, the road called. And the answer was always the same. Show up, stand up, speak up, and never, ever look away. Epilogue. 1 year later. The gymnasium at Riverside Elementary was packed. Parents filled the bleachers, teachers lined the walls, and students sat cross-legged on the floor, their faces lifted toward the makeshift stage at the front. It was the school's annual assembly, but this year was different. This year, there were guests. 28 motorcycles sat parked outside, visible through the gymnasium's tall windows. Their riders stood at the back of the room, leather jackets bearing the Iron Vow patch, arms crossed but expressions open. They'd been invited, officially, formally, with a printed invitation that Marcus kept folded in his wallet. Principal Lawson stood at the podium, her voice carrying through the microphone. Today, we're gathered to celebrate something important. Not a test score, not a sports victory, but a commitment, a promise to each other that this school is a place where every student belongs. She gestured to the side of the stage, where Mason Carter stood with his mother. He was taller now, his glasses updated, his dinosaur backpack replaced with something more age-appropriate. But the careful way he moved, the rhythm of his tapping fingers, remained. Last year, Mason faced something no child should face, and his story could have ended in silence, in resignation, in acceptance of the way things were. Principal Lawson's voice softened. But it didn't, because people stood up, and today we want to honor those people. One by one, the Iron Vow riders were called to the stage. Marcus, Revedani, Jess, Corey. Each one received a certificate, a piece of paper that meant little, perhaps, but represented something greater, recognition, gratitude, witness. But the most important moment came last. Mason stepped forward, holding something in his hands. It was a drawing, carefully framed, showing motorcycles and a small figure with glasses and stars overhead. He handed it to Marcus. "This is for you," Mason said, his voice quiet but clear, "because you came." Marcus knelt so he was eye level with the boy. "We'd come again, anytime you need us." Mason smiled. "I know." The gymnasium erupted in applause. Not polite, obligatory clapping, but genuine, thunderous recognition. Students cheered, parents stood, teachers wiped their eyes. And in the back of the room, Rev leaned close to Danny and whispered, "Think we made a difference?" Danny looked at Mason, standing on that stage with his head held high, his mother's hand on his shoulder, his smile reaching the stars. "Yeah," he said, "I think we did." After the assembly, families gathered outside. Children asked to sit on the motorcycles, to try on helmets, to hear the engines roar. The riders obliged, patient and gentle, answering questions and sharing stories. Amanda found Marcus near his Harley. "I never properly thanked you," she said. "Not for what you did, for who you are." Marcus shook his head. "We just showed up." "That's everything," Amanda replied. "In a world where people look away, you looked. You saw my son. You made him visible." Her voice broke. You gave him his childhood back. He did that himself. We just held space for it. As the sun set over Riverside, the motorcycles prepared to leave. But before they did, something unexpected happened. Children lined up along the parking lot, dozens of them, forming a corridor just like the one the riders had created for Mason a year before. And as the Iron Vow riders mounted their bikes and started their engines, those children raised their hands in silent salute. Not mockery, not fear, but respect. Marcus looked at the faces watching him. Students who'd learned that kindness was strength, that standing up mattered, that every person deserved dignity. He raised his hand in return, a gesture that rippled down the line of riders. Then they rode. Out of the parking lot onto the street, engines rumbling like distant thunder. They rode not toward anything in particular, but away from what had been. Away from silence, from complicity, from the belief that nothing could change. Behind them, Mason Carter stood with his mother and his friend Eric, watching until the last motorcycle disappeared from view. His fingers tapped his leg. 3 times. Pause. 3 times. Then he looked up at Amanda and said something he'd never said before. "I'm not scared anymore." Amanda pulled him close. "I know, baby, I know." And in that moment, as the echo of engines faded into the evening and stars began to appear overhead, everything felt possible. Not easy, not simple, but possible. Because sometimes all it takes is 28 people willing to show up, 28 hearts willing to stand, 28 voices willing to say, "You matter, you belong, you are not alone." Thanks for watching this story. If it moved you, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because every week we share stories of courage, kindness, and people who choose to stand when the world tells them to sit. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, you have the power to change someone's life. You just have to show up.